This is our last week before school starts, but even though the daily grind intensifies this time of year, I do believe that it's possible to integrate realistic habits for scratch cooking during busy seasons. So today I'm sharing my Sunday reset for a better week so we can do the grind and have homemade food. A year ago, this month actually, I set the goal to make 100% of my family's bread from scratch, and I have done that. But along the way, I have come up with a few tips and hacks for speeding up the process and making that realistic. Because I know that it can be really hard to fit projects like this into busy days, especially during the school year. So today I am making a maple oatmeal sourdough sandwich bread. For a Sunday reset, I like to do anything in the kitchen that takes a long time. Now, sourdough actually doesn't require much hands-on time, especially if you're making enriched doughs where you don't have to do stretch and folds, for example, but it does take a long time to bulk ferment and do a second rise. So Sundays for me are a great time to do this. And then what I like to do with my fresh bread on Sundays is once it's done, I like to slice it and freeze it so that way I don't have to worry about it going bad or getting stale. And if we don't get to it, it's not a problem at all. It is there for us and ready to go. To make this bread, I'm first taking a cup of whole rolled oats. And at first I started with a half a cup, but I realized pretty quickly that wasn't going to be enough. So I have a cup of whole rolled oats and I just covered them in water and set them aside while I made the dough. And what that does is it allows the oats to soak up the water so that way they're not pulling from the hydration of your dough later. But while those are soaking, I am mixing together the actual bread dough, which is 150 grams of sourdough starter, 230 grams of milk, 80 grams of maple syrup, about a tablespoon of olive oil, 100 grams of whole wheat flour, and about 300 grams of bread flour to start, though I did add probably about a quarter cup more as the dough was kneading. Oh, and of course, salt. Don't forget the salt in your bread. It's a total bummer if you do. And I let this run in the stand mixer on medium speed for about 10 minutes or until it passed the window pane test. But the one thing I want to note about this is that I let this dough stay a little sticky. Now, I did have to add a number of tablespoons of flour. Usually when my dough is sticky, I add a tablespoon at a time until it feels right. But I also know from experience that whole wheat is what I like to call a thirstier flour. And in time, as it sits in that bulk fermentation, it will soak up more of that water. So even though I don't want the dough to be really sticky, it is okay for it to be a little bit wet or tacky. Then once it passed the window pane test, I folded in the oatmeal by hand. And I will say that oatmeal definitely made the dough wet. So I added 2 more tablespoons of flour and rolled it through the stand mixer again just for like 45 seconds until the oatmeal mixed in. And then I put it in an oiled bowl and covered it and set it to the side for about 8 hours. And that's what I like about enriched bread, especially if you want to make sourdough, if you are in the midst of the daily grind, is that it doesn't really require any of your hands-on time. So I just set it off to the side, and then I am going to get back to this later in the video when it's actually about 8 hours later. The other thing I like to do for a Sunday reset to make my life a little bit easier Monday through Friday is to make one thing that can be used multiple ways. So I am making some hard-boiled eggs, or in this case, they're actually Instant Pot steamed eggs. And what I like about things like this is they're great by themselves for breakfast or a snack. You can add them to salads or on top of a sandwich if that's your thing, or you can even make egg salad with them. So it's this one ingredient that takes just a couple of minutes to make that's really versatile later on. I get my eggs from a woman who has a bunch of backyard chickens, so I always give them a good wash, and then I'm putting them in the Instant Pot, and I'm actually using a little steamer basket. The Instant Pot comes with something for that, but I can't find mine. So I put them in the steamer basket with a cup of water and cook them for 5 minutes. One of them did crack, so do keep in mind that if you pack them in there like I did, one might crack. I thought I heard an egg cracking when I put them in there, but I couldn't find it, but it definitely did crack. I have tried every method in the books for hard-boiled eggs that easily peel, and this one I think is the best one. It's still a little imperfect, but they do peel a little bit easier this way, and that is key for busy days. I know it doesn't take a long time to peel an egg, but let me tell you what I'm not in the mood for when I'm busy: an egg that won't peel. I am not great at remembering to pull meat out every day from the freezer to thaw. In fact, I'm actually pretty terrible at it. I forget all the time, and I've been forgetting a lot lately. So one of the things I'm trying to do on my new Sunday reset routine is to take meat out of the freezer that I'm going to eat that week and put it in the fridge so that way it can slowly thaw throughout the week and I have it ready to go. But one of the things I'm also trying to do is to put back into my freezer. So if I'm taking meat out of it, that means next week I'm going to have less to choose from. So I try to do sort of something similar to like if you buy a piece of clothing, you have to take a piece out of your closet. If you take something out of the freezer, put it back in. So I am making a few chicken marinades to put in the freezer. So that way future me can have a better day. First, I'm making a cilantro lime marinade. So I took an entire bunch of cilantro and chopped it up. You could definitely use less if you want to, but there's not enough cilantro in the world for me, so I'm using as much as I can. And I'm mixing it with avocado oil. I would use olive oil regularly for this, but I actually didn't have enough olive oil, so avocado it is. Then I'm adding fresh squeezed limes. I think I used 2 limes, salt, pepper, and cumin. Give it a good stir, and then I'm pouring it right into a Ziploc bag with 4 pieces of chicken breast. Once I have the marinade in there, I throw it in the fridge just for a couple of hours. You could put it in the fridge for up to 24 hours, but then after it marinates for a little bit, I'm sticking it in the freezer. Anytime I am preparing a raw freezer ingredient like this, I always label the bag with raw, so that way I know come say Wednesday night when I'm in a pinch that I actually have to make the food I prepared. And then I'm making a really simple honey mustard marinade in the same way. It's just oil, honey, mustard, a little bit of apple cider vinegar, and salt and pepper. When it comes time to use these, I'll just take them out, put them in the fridge to thaw, and then I'll probably bake them in the oven. So my Sunday reset isn't just about the coming days ahead. It's also thinking a little bit about the next week, which honestly, I don't really plan that far ahead into the next week because my life is too crazy. Who knows what's going to be happening that time? But it does make things more simplified later because I've already restocked the freezer at least a little bit for the coming weeks. Quite possibly the most important part of every day is coffee. I have a 3-year-old. I'm tired. I need caffeine. I have this obsession lately with these iced coffees from a grocery store down the street. They're really good, but they're like $4 a pop. I don't really know what's in them. So I am recreating them at home and I'm making a homemade coffee creamer to use throughout the week. And this is really easy. So it's equal parts milk and cream. You could totally leave out the cream if you don't want that or use half and half if you wanted to. A 1/4 cup of brown sugar. And then I added 3 tablespoons of homemade bourbon vanilla, give it a little whirl, and that's it. So to use this to make an iced coffee, at least what I'm doing is making a double shot of espresso. If you don't have an espresso machine, you can just make a nice concentrated cup of coffee. And then pour the espresso or coffee over ice. I added in a little spoon of cocoa powder because the place where I get these iced coffees adds chocolate to it and it's really good. And then I poured in some of the creamer that I made. Now, I should have used a bigger cup. I had to switch because I was making a mess. Cocoa powder takes a little while to hydrate. So the next time I do this, I'm going to put the cocoa powder right into the creamer. So that way it's more of a mocha creamer. And that is how I'm going to make my iced coffees this week rather than spending $4 a pop. A lot of homemade creamer recipes call for condensed milk, which I don't really like to use that much. So I like this recipe because it doesn't have that. And also, unlike the store-bought coffee creamers, this has just simple pantry staple ingredients that I feel really good about. And you can tweak this to meet your dietary needs. You can reduce the sugar, you could use coconut sugar, use less cream, use no cream. It's really versatile and a great option if you are into flavored coffees. Most often for a Sunday reset for a better week, I bulk prep ingredients rather than meals. Now, I'm no stranger to freezer meals. I do make them sometimes, but I don't really mind cooking each day. I actually prefer it. And my whole family and I, we kind of like a little more variety and spontaneity in how we eat. So I like to keep some ingredients on hand. If you've been around Moon and Magnolia for a while, you're probably really tired of hearing me talk about bulk prepping rice, but it is game changing. So I like to make a big pot of brown rice or white rice in the Instant Pot. And then once it's finished, I just let it cool. I'll eat some for dinner that night. I will take some out for the week, and the rest I freeze for days when I'm in a major pinch. To make brown rice in the Instant Pot is simply 2 cups of rice to 2.5 cups of water. Cook it on high pressure for 20 minutes and then let the pressure release on its own, which usually takes about 30 minutes or so. I double this up so that way we have plenty of grains around whenever we want them. Another thing I like to do to prepare for the week is get as much chopping out of the way as I can. Chopping is not difficult, but it does take time. And then I have a cutting board to clean up and knives to hand wash and those sorts of things. So I like to chop up anything that I have in the fridge or in the pantry beforehand. And this is actually a really great way just to take stock of your inventory, to know what you have in the fridge, what you have in the pantry, and what you need to replace. So I actually only had peppers and onions to chop, but that is enough to get us through the week. And now I know that I'm out of vegetables to chop. So I just chop these up kind of rough so that way they're versatile for any recipe, put them in their own bowls and stick them in the fridge. I used 2 onions and I think that was 4 peppers, which actually might be a little bit much for us through the week. I'm not 100% sure yet, but if by midweek it looks like we're not going to get through them, I put them in the freezer and now I have some frozen veggies to use on days I'm in a pinch. And finally, back to the bread. Now, if you want more hacks for making sourdough work for busy schedules, I just posted a video about this a few days ago. I will link that in the description box below for you. But while that dough was bulk fermenting, I did all the other things of my day and I didn't even have to touch it. But now that it's doubled in size, I'm simply buttering a baking dish and now I am shaping the dough. So I'm folding the 2 long ends of the dough toward the center and pinching it, and then folding the 2 short ends of the dough into the center and pinching it and just kind of shaping it, tucking it in a little bit. At this point, if you are in a time crunch and you cannot do the second rise because you don't have enough time, you can cover it and put it in the fridge and let it chill overnight up to 3 days. The longer it sits in there, the more sour it will become. So that might be good or bad depending on your preferences, but that stops the fermentation process. For me, it's easier just to bake the same day. So once it was shaped, I let it sit in the bread pan, I think for about 3 hours until it was about doubled in size and domed on the top. And I use my hand just to add a little bit of water to the top of the dough so that way the oats can stick to the top. If you don't want to put the oats on there, you don't have to. It's definitely not a deal breaker for the bread, but it does give it a nice aesthetic quality. And then I baked it at 400 degrees, I think for about 40 minutes. I think about halfway through, I did cover it with foil to stop the browning. And this turned out beautifully. It is hearty, of course, because it has whole wheat and oatmeal in it, but it still has that light and fluffy texture of a sandwich bread. And we love it. It was great with toast. It'll be perfect for sandwiches. And because it has that whole wheat and oats in it, it just has a little more added nutrition and sustains you a little bit longer. I hope these ideas give you some encouragement and ways to think about how to prepare ahead so you can enjoy scratch-made and homemade food even during busy times. What works for me might not work for you, so it might take a little bit of dabbling to figure out what is right for you and your family. But whether you're making all of your family's food from scratch or none of it from scratch, don't forget, you are doing a great job. There is content out there sometimes that makes us feel like we're not doing enough and that we can never be enough. And I want you to know that these are just ideas, just points of inspiration, but I think no matter what, you're doing great. Thank you so much for tuning into Moon and Magnolia's YouTube channel, where we elevate the everyday from scratch and at home, and I'll see you again next time.